Welcome to 5 Good Minutes.
You're listening to today's inspirational message on the book of Ecclesiastes
With Brady Randall.
Did you ever have that moment when you felt conflicted and didn't know who to obey? You didn't know whether to give in to peer pressure or not. You didn't know which way was right. I recently got to go to a sporting event with my son, and he was there with one of his friends, and the referee appeared to make a series of bad calls, and the crowd had had enough. And the fans began to yell obscenities towards the ref, and a chant broke out very loudly with the fans chanting, "Ref, you suck! Ref, you suck!" And in that moment, I could see how conflicted my son was. His friend joined in the crowd, "Ref, you suck." And I could see that my son wanted to kind of join in the revelry, but I could also see his hesitation. He was looking at me, seeing if I was chanting, but in his mind, he was wondering if it was truly appropriate. It takes wisdom to know how to respond, especially to the authorities in your life and that are over us. Yesterday in our podcast, we kicked off Ecclesiastes 8 in verse 1, and that served as an opening for describing wisdom. And here in verses 2 to 9, we see how the teacher applies this to kings and authorities. Verse 2, it says this, "Obey the king's command, I say, because you took an oath before God." Literally, this is saying keep the mouth of the king, as in keep watch over. Wisdom helps us to know what to do when we're not the ones in control, when we are receiving commands that are outside of us. And when he's talking about the king and authorities, I don't think he's making a sweeping generalization on political theory here. But what does wisdom say to you and I when you're in the presence of a king or someone over you or the authorities? Keep the king's command because of the oath that you took. And whether this is God's oath to the king or your oath to God about obeying the king, he says to keep the king's command. Now, we also know this is not an absolute command because of what we read in verse 3. Do not be in a hurry to leave the king's presence. Do not stand up for a bad cause, for he will do whatever he pleases. So don't be in a hurry to leave the king's presence can either mean to show respect when you enter or leave his presence, or make sure you know exactly what the king wants from you because you quickly leave his presence to be able to do it and to accomplish it. But either way, he says, don't stand up for a bad cause. Don't do something evil and wicked. Don't go against your conscience for something that you know is evil. For the king does whatever he pleases anyway. This is like Acts chapter 6, where Peter says that we, if you're a follower of Jesus, he says we are to obey God rather than human authorities. Verse 4, we read this, "Since a king's word is supreme, who can say to him, 'What are you doing?'" You can't expect to speak back to the king and ultimately get away with it. Verses 5 to 7 says this, "Whoever obeys his command will come to no harm, and the wise heart will know the proper time and procedure. For there is a proper time and procedure for every matter, though a person may be weighed down by misery. Since no one knows the future, who can tell someone else what is to come?" So wisdom tells us there's a right time and a place for everything. For what you hear, for what you put into practice from the authorities above. And it's a common experience for a person to be weighed down by misery. But wisdom, rather, is taking our eyes off of misery and what we're feeling and the things that we can't control. For no one knows the future but God himself. No man, no king, no power or president has the ability to retain their own spirit over the time of their death, as he goes on to say in verse 8. In other words, no man or king or president can determine when they live or when they die. And so those moments of being conflicted, continuing on with the masses or the crowd will be tempting. Continuing with a powerful leader or political movement may be enticing, for the teacher reminds us, who can resist the king? But wisdom reminds us rather, obey God rather than humans, for even human authorities ultimately have to answer to God. For the human authorities have been given by God, but they are fallible. And so I want to encourage you today, and then start of a new year, 2025, to find your source of wisdom in the wisest source of them all, which is God and his word to you, given in the Holy Scriptures. He promises that when we seek Him and ultimately His wisdom, we will find it. But this is only possible if you go to the right source.
Thanks for joining us here today. There's a lot of great content to explore on Orchard Hill Plus and on the Orchard Hill main feed from the weekend. Have a great day.